Well, we'll pick up this morning where we left off last week. We'll finish James off this morning. But if you recall, last week we looked at the question that James and John had presented to the Lord in Mark 10 and 37. Remember, they asked Jesus, they said, "Grant us that we may sit on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory." And we had good discussion as to why they may have asked that question. And we also talked about why would they have asked Jesus that question and what were they hoping to gain. And we had good talk on that also. And we realized that their boldness in asking Jesus also upset the other disciples. That was a consequence of them doing that. And even after Jesus warned them with these words, Jesus said, "You do not know what you are asking for." And they really didn't take time to consider what he was saying to them. And they replied, "No, we are able. We're able to do that." And so we realized then it wasn't Peter alone who spoke out sometimes before thinking. And we also gave reasons as to why the 12 were confused about Jesus's purpose, which caused them to ask questions such as this. I overlooked mentioning Luke 19 and verse 11. This was after Jesus had spoke with Zacchaeus. We read there, "Now as they heard these things," that's the disciples, Jesus spoke another parable to them because he was nearing Jerusalem. But here's what they were thinking as they were coming back to Jerusalem. It says that they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. So we can see and understand why they asked some of the questions that they did. They really didn't have a clear vision of what was going on. And that would stir up within them a want of power and authority. They weren't aware of Satan and his deceiving ways. And if you look at Acts 1 and verse 6, Acts 1 and verse 6, here's what they ask now, and this is after Jesus has resurrected. They go, "Therefore, when they had come together, they asked him, saying, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel?" They're still asking the same question, aren't they? So we understand that their confusion. And securing the preeminence is something that we are challenged with also. We can understand why the disciples would have thought and spoke the way they did. It's not an uncommon human wanting. They wanted the power. And we see in Luke 22 and verse 24, I put this in just as a warning for us. Luke 22 and verse 24, this is at the Last Supper with Jesus. And look at what is happening with the disciples in verse 24. "Now there was also a dispute among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest." That thought it just kept lingering with them, didn't it? Their desire to it. And we've seen a weakness with the 12 that presents a challenge with us. And it would be inappropriate, really, for us. This has been mentioned, but as we study the apostles, it's inappropriate to ridicule them too much. We need not be too harsh with them. They made mistakes with their understanding, and we ask ourselves the question, wouldn't we have wanted to sit with Jesus on his right hand? Jared first and then Gord.
I said it's exactly what you'd expect. It's not that they were acting different, really, than you'd expect people to act.
Exactly.
And when it came to the kingdom, that's what the Jews were at. They were seeking that. It was a misunderstanding, and they could be corrected for their misunderstanding. Now, sometimes Jesus was frustrated because it would be the same misunderstanding all the time, but at the same time, it was a misunderstanding, a time for growth.
Exactly. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's in our nature to always be competing for the whole position of the number one place. Teacher's pet in school. You want, or whatever we do. It's usually a competition. It's not that we purposely do it. It's just our nature that we want to be there first. We want to be in the highlights of things. And Jesus said the opposite. We need to humble ourselves. Right?
Exactly.
Those who exalt themselves will be humbled. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. It's really not for us to be patting ourselves on the back.
Right. And we'll see that as we go along. But going with what you and Jared just mentioned, we see, though, that Jesus didn't give up on them, did he? His apostles, he knew would have shortcomings, but he just continued to teach and to train them. And that's how we learn, through experience, through understanding. And so with James then, going back to James, we see now that James, along with the other 11, were given special miraculous powers, even with their shortcomings. Jesus had a purpose for them, and he would continue to work with them. And we see that he gave them the miraculous powers when he sent them out to the lost sheep of Israel. And so we see Jesus's attitude with them. And besides that, James being involved in the preaching of that commission of Matthew 10, he also would have had part in the later Great Commission to the world. We don't have a lot recorded on James, but his labors are not recorded, but neither are the labors of many of the other apostles. And as Kala brought out in one of our studies, remember what John stated in John chapter 20, that many other signs Jesus did, many other things happened. But what is written that we might believe. And that goes with John 21 and 25. John again says that if everything was written, there wouldn't be enough books to hold all that, to hold all the experiences. And Peter, the Apostle Peter, makes it quite clear in 1 Peter 1 and 3 that divine power, meaning God, and what he has reserved for us, has given to us all things that pertain to life and godliness. So what we have written is for our purpose, and what we have written about the apostles is how we glean strength from, glean courses of action to take, when we fail. And so what we have, we need to be satisfied with. And I thought, James, if you remember the bold claim that James and John made, that we are able. Okay, sometimes blurting out things come back to haunt us. And James was one of the first apostles really to fully realize what Jesus told them, as recorded in John 15. If we look back at that, maybe instead of me reading, I'll get Naomi, do you want to read John 15, 18 to 20, and then Gord, you can do Mark chapter 10, verse 39, please.
If the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours.
And Gord?
Mark 10:39.
Yeah.
They said to him, "We are able."
Okay.
Oh, sorry, there's more to it.
Yeah.
A big space. So Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I am baptized with, you will be baptized."
Okay, from both of those passages, we understand as Christians, persecution's going to come. It came more so to the apostles in that day and age of what they lived in. But let's not be surprised. Let's not be discouraged. Gord?
Well, we're told that those that live godly will suffer persecution.
Right.
We're told that. But there are certain religions out there that will use that as a badge of honor, even though they're not following 100% what's in the Bible. They take that verse and they treat it as a badge of honor when somebody throws a bucket of water on them to get them out of their driveway and stuff like that. I'm not going to say which group, but we all know that they'll use it as a badge of honor. Yeah, we're right. You see, we're persecuted.
Right, that's true, yeah. Well, we hopefully as Christians we don't think that way and use it.
We should.
But the thought is, James here, tragically, was killed by the sword of Herod the king. And we read that in Acts chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. This Herod that killed James was the grandson of Herod the Great, who ruled when Jesus was born. And for this Herod, it was politically prudent for him to keep a good relationship with the Jews. That was part of his duty. And so we see that he began to take hostile action against certain Christians.
Wasn't he Jewish himself?
Eh?
Wasn't he Jewish himself?
I don't know.
This Herod?
No, but he was trying to keep peace with the Jewish people and the Sanhedrin. And James is the first apostle to suffer martyrdom. And we see that later when Herod saw that this pleased the Jews, this made them happy, well, he arrested Peter with the intent to kill him also. Okay, but God delivered Peter. And that raises an important thought that I think we need to remind ourselves as Christians, because the world is always feeding us with the thought of, well, why does God allow this? And why does God allow that? Why doesn't God intervene? Well, you know, we think of James. Okay, James had been a fisherman not that long ago. He quit his business to become a constant companion of Jesus. And Jesus appointed him, okay, to become an apostle of his. And now we see James being killed in a brutal way. And Peter, God delivers Peter. And so we need to be careful, because we want to ask the question, why was one delivered and not the other? Okay, well, God in his providential activity may for reasons that our, if you want to use the word finite minds, our minds don't understand and can't imagine. And we ask, well, why does he choose to deliver one Christian from another? But what we need to do is pray for deliverance, pray for strength to continue to be faithful. And the results have to be left to God. If they're not left to God, we work on our emotion and we become discouraged. Why? We don't know why. We're not God, and we don't see the future where God does. Jared?
In the end, James didn't lose anything. He lost
Right.
his life. And we often focus on the physical. Well, why didn't God do this? James didn't die a faithless man. He died for the faith as a faithful man.
Right.
He has the hope that everyone else does. Yes, we might say, well, couldn't James have done this? But this happened.
Yeah.
And yes, you're right. We don't know exactly why, but at the same time, James is not dying with one who had no hope.
Exactly.
So we can take solace in that.
Right. That's a good point. Our hope of eternity. We had was it Tim, the gospel meeting? Was it Tim that said, the suffering that we go through, let the Lord take me. Take me now. I want to be in heaven. And that's, that's the attitude we need to have within our hearts, that no matter what happens, of course, there'll be hurt to loved ones after we're gone, but we're in heaven. Gord, and then Jeff.
Well, it's not like they didn't know ahead of time that their lives would be taken. Because Jesus warned them of that on several occasions, that you are going to suffer persecution.
Right.
You are going to be baptized with the same baptism. Right? But
Yeah.
let's say John was taken first. Well, we could also say, well, why John and not James or Peter or whoever? It's God's plan. We don't need to question God's plan.
Right. That's the point we were making. That's right. Jeff?
Well, we're looking at this situation from our perspective,
Right.
which is, apostles 2,000 years ago. But this study is helping us understand the apostles themselves a little better, a little insight into the apostles. I think about John himself,
Yes.
because it's his brother who was taken by Herod and put to death by the sword. And then almost immediately afterward, Peter
Right.
is taken, and yet Peter's released. If anyone
Mm-hmm.
questioned what has just happened, I think it would be John, his brother, wondering, Lord, why was my brother put to death? Why is Peter released? We're all apostles, we're all furthering the kingdom of heaven, but not once in the scriptures do we see that John ever had any question.
Right.
Ever questioned the Lord why his brother was put to death.
Yeah.
So I think we can learn a little something about John too.
Yeah, right.
From that.
It's an example for us, isn't it? And we'll look at that when we're going to get right into John. We're speaking about these disciples when they were young. We don't know what age they were, but they were young men. But we're comparing what they were like in their young age to what they grew into. That should be our goal, really, because we're all the same. When we became Christians, your courage now is, well, with some, the courage is great in the beginning and then it weans. Others, the courage is not there in the beginning, but as time goes on, experience, seeing things, then your faith becomes stronger. Chair?
And let's remember one thing. God avenged James's death. Herod, in the end of chapter 12, died.
Right.
At the hand of God. And so, God did not approve of the sin of Herod.
Right.
And Herod got what he deserved for his arrogance and all of the other things he did too. And so, we can see the justice of God. It may have been, yes, God allowed this, and God had a greater purpose for this, but God judges the wicked. And we can see that as well.
Exactly. That's a good point. Yeah, there's so much we can cover and bring out as we study them. But as we end with James, then remember that James, the brother of John, was not the writer, okay, of the book of James. The writer of that book, remember we looked at in our overview classes of the New Testament. The writer of that book, James, was the brother of the Lord. And so then we end with James. We've looked pretty much at everything we could that we're given with him. And we'll look at the Apostle John. And John, as we saw, was much the same as his brother James. They were kind of a spitting image of each other. Both Jesus called sons of thunder, and both of them sought to call down fire upon the Samaritans. We looked at that last week. And they both requested to sit beside Christ's throne in his kingdom. And we saw that last week that they had influenced their mom also, along with that thought, to stand behind them. And John, yes, was bold. He was outspoken. And we've seen that now in Peter. We saw that with Peter and James and John. They were very intense. However, John was impatient also and zealous to a fault, okay, at times in his youth. That's why I just made that earlier point. We're all gung-ho when we're young. And at times we blurt out things that we shouldn't. But then as time goes on, we see that things change. And John also wrote 5 of the New Testament books, and it seems that he wrote them all within the last quarter of the first century. I could be wrong on the dates, but we went through all that in our overview. We think that's when they were all wrote. And his gospel, okay, we'll look at when we get to Matthew, that's when this idea first comes out. But John writes his gospel, and how he does that is he views Jesus as the Son of God. Okay, Luke is more to the Son of Man, Jesus as a man. But John speaks clearly of the Son of God. And as we think about that, he sets forth Jesus, and he calls him the Word, as being equal with God, the Father, and the Creator of all things. John 1, we'll read these passages. Kyle, I'll give you John 1, verses 1 to 4. And Jeff, you and Tammy want to split John 5, 17 to 23. And Leslie, I'll give you chapter 19 and verse 30. So with these verses, we get an attitude of John's style of writing and of what he believes. So who had John 1? Kala?
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men.
Okay, and Jeff?
But Jesus answered them, My Father has been working until now, and I have been working. Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Then Jesus answered and said to them, Most assuredly I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. But whatever he does, the Son also does in like manner.
For the Father loves the Son, and shows him all things that he himself does. And he will show him greater works than these, that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, even so the Son gives life to whom he will. For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all should honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him.
John 19:30. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, It is finished. With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
Okay. So in all these passages, it's not hard to see what John is wanting us to understand about Jesus. Is that we'll touch on his style of writing in a bit, but John's laying it out here pretty clearly, isn't he? Who Christ is. And with Leslie's verse, he shows us that Jesus continued to the end. He fulfilled his purpose, and John lets us know that. And he tells us that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. That's John 1 and verse 14. Phoebe, I'll give you that verse, please. John 1, verse 14.
And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth.
Okay. Remember that verse as we get going on in our lesson. We'll see this is already on John's mind. And he tells us, John tells us, that they, meaning the 12, they were credible witnesses, okay, to the Word of God. Verse 15, John 1 and verse 15. Have you got that, Francis? Do you want to read that? John 1 and verse 15.
John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, This is the one I spoke about when I said, He who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me.
Okay. From that verse and the way it's translated for us, we see John's thought.
Is it John or John the Baptist?
Okay, John the Baptist,
That
sorry.
kind of sounds like John the Baptist,
Yeah,
because he referred to Christ as being greater than him.
right. John is speaking of, the point was John was a witness to that, to what John the Baptist said. Sorry, I didn't explain that well.
Yeah, John
But
was a
he's-
forerunner for Christ.
Right, and John saw that and knew that and heard those things that day. And he's making the point to us that I saw that. I'm a credible witness, and we need to understand that. And 1 John 1, we just read that, didn't we?
No,
No.
not first.
Didn't we?
John.
No,
Not
that
first.
was John 1.
First John.
Oh, that's right, sorry. 1 John 1 and verses 1 to 4. Menchie, can you read that one for us?
That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon and our hands have handled, concerning the word of life. the life was manifested, and we have seen and bear witness and declare to you that eternal life which was with the Father and was manifested to us. That which we have seen and heard we declare to you, that you also may have one fellowship with us, and truly our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son Jesus Christ. And these things we write to you, that your joy may be full.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where the 12 were the witnesses.
The which Gord?
This is where the 12, John writes about being witnesses.
Right, right. You know, when someone you know and have come to trust and learn, when they tell you things of what they've witnessed, maybe it's a car accident, I don't know anything, you believe them. There's no doubt in your mind. And as Christians, you know, these verses, the apostles, we need to have the same trust and confidence in what they say. They were there. They saw it. And our confidence is in reading of them all through the New Testament, never seeing contradictions. Our trust has to be in that. Jeff?
First, we examine the believability of the witness themselves.
Right.
Things about the witness themselves.
Good
Before
point.
I believe anyone's witness about a car accident or something, first I want to make sure they believable, credible. Is there a reason?
Right.
But you're right. Once we have established that part, then there's no reason to reject their witness and testimony of something.
Yeah, exactly. Remember that point. I'll bring it out a little bit later when we speak of the different gospel writers. But that's true, and we should be that way. And also with John, he wrote of Jesus's prayer to his Father just before his crucifixion. And because of that chapter, John has become known as the apostle of unity through that passage. But we're seeing that John's whole purpose is not so much as Christ walked day to day on earth and things that happen to him, but that who he is. He's the Son of God. And John's driving that point home to his readers. And also, John presents, with the thought Jeff just mentioned, John presents these truths as strong evidences for saving faith. Okay? There is no doubt with what John is saying. And also then, we'll get through a little bit more here. In John's 3 epistles now, we see how John deals with the brethren in the churches at that time in the 3 epistles. And Revelation, he wrote also, and he deals there with the immediate future, okay, in the first century, which was revealed to him through visions, which God sent him. That's everything John writes in Revelations were visions from God, and helping him to build the strength of the first century Christians as they were dealing with their persecution at that time. And another point with John is that John was an extremely black and white writer. You know, there's an old saying that we have that goes, he dealt with absolute lines in the sand. And that fits John well. John was simply black and white. There was no gray areas with John. And his gospel, if you remember in his gospel, he includes comparisons to help us see and understand. He includes comparisons with light and darkness, okay? Life and death, and children of God and children of Satan. he writes in an understandable way, directing our thoughts. And in chapter 1, verses 6 to 7, I'll breeze through these because I see the clock's running down. John 1, verses 6 to 7.
First John or John?
Oh, did I not put First John in there?
Well, you said first epistle, so that first letter, so it'd be First John.
Let me see here. I don't know how I messed that up.
No, yeah, it's there. It's his first letter.
It's there.
Yes, First John, sorry. First John, chapter 1 and 3 and 4. But First John 1, 6 and 7 reads, if we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. There's a contrast there John is writing about between words and works. And he makes it plain right in the beginning, doesn't he? He says, if we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie. It's understandable. And chapter 3, verses 6 to 9, whoever abides in him does not sin. Whoever sins has neither seen him nor known him. Little children, let no one deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. And he who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Again, in those passages, John lays it out clear and plain, doesn't he? And challenges us to consider what he's saying. And our last one, chapter 4, verses 4 and 5, you are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are of the world, therefore they speak as of the world, and the world hears them. And down to verse 7 and 8, beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. John's writing makes it plain and simple, doesn't he? Black and white,
There's no
clear as day.
line, 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
The which court?
There's no 1 foot in and 1 foot out.
Yeah.
There's no hedging your bets.
Right,
It's either this or that.
right, exactly. And no misunderstanding. But we see then from a lot of John's writing that truth was John's passion. We're not saying that the other apostles' truth wasn't their passion, but in John's style of writing, he brings that out. And he delivered it plain and simple. He had a thunderous personality in connection with a passion for what was right. And this did lead him to some extreme positions in his youth. As I said, we look at ourselves. But as we have seen, that zeal and intolerance are useful tools. They have to be a part of our thinking. But when they're held in proper balance, okay, along with other character traits. And we see that with John.
I'm not ashamed to